Welcome everybody, my name is Josh. This is the deep dive full video on my XRP thesis called The Trade of the Decade. Please hit the subscribe button at the end of this video if you enjoyed the information. What you're about to hear is a thesis built entirely from first principles, starting with geopolitics, moving through energy markets, through currency dynamics, and finally through payment infrastructure failure, arriving at a single asset sitting at the intersection of every single thread. That asset is XRP, and the window to position yourself is closing in real time. The Strait of Hormuz. Let's begin with the trigger. The fact that you are viewing my content on YouTube tells me you are well aware of the war in Iran. For all that have never heard of the Strait of Hormuz, the strait is a narrow channel of water approximately 30 miles wide at its narrowest point. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. This strait happens to also be the most important geographic oil choke point on Earth. 20 million barrels of oil flow through it every single day. That is 20% of everything the world consumes. And here is the brutal reality. There is no real bypass. The combined pipeline capacity to route around the strait is only 2.6 million barrels per day. A full closure means 17.5 million barrels simply disappear from global supply overnight. There is no plan B. The closure sends oil past $100, igniting global inflation. Here is the interesting part. Japan imports 87% of its energy and sources 95% of its crude through Hormuz. It enters a full-scale economic crisis. The yen weakens violently past 160 US dollars. The Bank of Japan is forced to raise interest rates by 50 to 75 basis points, the largest hike in decades. That single hike triggers the unwinding of the Japanese yen carry trade. For those of you who do not know what the Japanese yen carry trade is, let me explain briefly. An example of the yen carry trade involves borrowing yen at very low interest rates and converting it to US dollars, then investing the US dollars in assets such as US Treasury bonds and in other market instruments in that currency offering higher yields. Believe it or not, but this trade has been happening for 3 decades. Just imagine for a second here that the Bank of Japan are forced to raise interest rates by 50 to 75 basis points in a panic. Now we are looking at a major liquidity crisis, the reversal of the trade, where suddenly $1 to $15 trillion in positions suddenly become losses overnight. Japanese institutions begin dumping US treasuries and equities to convert dollars back to yen. SWIFT buckles under the velocity and volume, and the world desperately needs a new settlement system, and fast. SWIFT fails because it takes 3 to 5 business days to settle. It costs up to $50 per transaction plus the Forex spread. In a panic where hundreds of billions of dollars need to cross borders in hours, not days, that settlement window is not a delay. It is a death sentence for every institution caught inside of it. XRP settles in 3 to 5 seconds at a cost of 0.02 of a cent. And it eliminates the pre-funded accounts that tie up billions in idle capital across the world's banking system. In a liquidity crisis, freeing up that capital is everything. Why does it have to be XRP? Because you cannot build what Ripple has already built in the time the crisis allows. 75 regulatory licenses across the globe, over 100 central bank and institutional partnerships, $95 billion in payments volume already processed, confirmed commodity status, not a security, and finally full ISO 2022 compliance, the messaging standard the entire global banking system is migrating to right now. And Japan, the country at the epicenter of the crisis, has already adopted Ripple's technology through SBI Holdings. The rails are built, they are operational, and they are already connecting the countries that matter the most. The BIS is already describing XRP. Now here's the smoking gun. The Bank for International Settlements published the blueprint for their unified global ledger through Project Agora. Read the documents carefully and the description is unmistakable. A private, public, programmable core financial platform. Atomic settlement where money either moves or it doesn't. No money ever in limbo. 3 to 5 second cross-border finality at negligible cost. That is not a description of something they plan to build. That is a description of the XRP ledger as it exists today. Phase 1 of Project Agora concludes mid-2026, right as this crisis is unfolding. Brad Garlinghouse is consistently the only private sector representative in rooms full of central bankers. You do not get invited to those rooms to pitch. You get invited when you are already the answer. Ripple's complete financial system. Ripple spent 2025 making absolutely sure they were ready. 5 strategic acquisitions in 18 months that together form a complete end-to-end financial system. Hidden Road, a prime brokerage clearing $3 trillion annually, has tripled in size since the acquisition and is now listed on the National Securities Clearing Corporation directory. That is Wall Street's core plumbing. Rail for cross-border stablecoin payment rails. G-Treasury for Fortune 500 treasury management, and finally Palisade for institutional custody infrastructure. And on top of all this, Ripple applied for a national trust bank charter, giving it direct access to Federal Reserve payment infrastructure. This is not a fintech startup. This is a bank built entirely on blockchain rails, assembled quietly while the world was looking the other way. Now let's talk about the mechanism. 4 levers to reprice XRP. How they drive XRP's price high enough, fast enough to provide the liquidity depth the crisis demands. The 4 levers are: first, the escrow supply shock. Ripple holds 35 to 38 billion XRP in escrow and currently relocks 700 million every month by pure choice. There is no protocol obligation. Stop relocking and exchange supply collapses instantly. Second, the exchange float is already at historical lows, down 62% to just 1.5 billion tokens. Any demand shock that hits the market with almost no buffer. Third, 7 spot XRP ETFs are already running with nearly 800 million XRP locked in custody, a permanent one-way valve removing supply. And fourth, the nuclear option. Both Brad Garlinghouse and BlackRock's Larry Fink have publicly refused to discuss a potential XRP ETF, citing legal inability. Executives do not cite legal constraints on hypothetical products unless the deal is already signed under non-disclosure. That announcement is waiting for exactly the right moment. RLUSD saves the bond market. Here is the part that most people completely miss: the RLUSD and Genius Act connection. The Genius Act regulating stablecoins was passed before the broader Clarity Act. That sequencing was deliberate. When Japan dumps $1.1 trillion in US treasuries and the bond market goes into freefall, RLUSD scales massively as the crisis settlement stablecoin. And here is the genius. By law, every single dollar of RLUSD issued must be backed by US Treasury bills as reserves. So as RLUSD scales into the hundreds of billions, it becomes a structural buyer of the exact bonds Japan is selling. The crisis creates the demand for the tool that simultaneously cures the crisis. XRP settles the flows, RLUSD stabilizes the bond market. Ripple built both. Now let's do the actual mathematics, because this is arithmetic, not speculation. XRP's on-demand liquidity uses XRP as a bridge asset. For large institutional transactions to settle without catastrophic price slippage, the liquidity pool in each corridor must be at least 200 to 500 times the transaction size. With only 1.5 billion XRP available on exchanges, a full carry trade unwind of $500 billion requires a price of between $160 to $250 just to function. A complete systemic crisis at 1 to 2 trillion means a $300 to $1,000 is not a ceiling. It is a mathematical flaw. The higher the price is not a bonus. It is the very mechanism by which the system can function at all. And here's what makes this so extraordinary. This is not one bet. It is 2 compounding value events that build directly on each other. Event 1 is the crisis repricing. The Hormuz closure and carry trade unwind force institutional adoption. The supply shock and the BlackRock ETF trigger the repricing. XRP reaches $100 to $500, that becomes the new floor. The price of an asset that has proven itself under the most extreme conditions in modern financial history. From that floor, event 2 plays out through to 2030. The tokenization of all global assets, XRP capturing the derivatives settlement market, replacing SWIFT entirely, and finally achieving Tier 1 global reserve asset status. Target price at that stage, $1,000 to $10,000. The long-term strategy is elegant. Never sell. Borrow against your XRP at 10% loan to value. Fund your lifestyle from the loan. Let appreciation service the interest. Never trigger a capital gains event. This is how generational wealth is built and preserved. When XRP does finally appreciate, there'll be a lot of people that run into a ton of money. I want to close with the quote that captures everything about this. Stay small enough for long enough, and soon enough you'll be big enough. The infrastructure is built, the licenses are in place, the central banks are already in the room, the acquisitions are complete, and the crisis that forces adoption is unfolding now in real time, as of March 2026. This thesis was not found on social media. It was reasoned from first principles, from geopolitics through energy, through currency, and finally through payment infrastructure failure, arriving at a single asset at the intersection of every thread. That's XRP. Cold storage is essential. Patience is everything. The window is open. Thank you for listening. Please remember to subscribe if you like this.